Ladies and gentlemen, get ready to do a deep dive with Robert Neto, the man who has single-handedly made Sidemount diving more popular than pineapple pizza. He's the author of the very successful book titled Sidemount Diving, an almost comprehensive guide, a book that has become a must-read for anybody currently thinking about Sidemount or already diving it regularly. Robert has been diving for over 20 years and is an expert in recreational and technical diving. Now, if you like this kind of content, please make sure to subscribe and share this channel with your friends. Oh, and don't forget to hit that bell so you can get notifications of upcoming events. Robert has an amazing amount of knowledge on diving and the industry, so you'll want to watch all the way to the end. We're excited to have him here and to talk to him about his book, his adventures, and let's see if we can get him to lend us his rebreather. Now, again, my name is Benjamin Hadfield, and I'm a technical diving instructor with Teach Me to Dive, connecting divers with quality instructors, dive shops, dive locations, dive agencies, and safe diving education. Thank you, Robert, for spending the afternoon with us on this virtual dive into your world.
Thank you for having me, Benjamin. I appreciate you reaching out to me and inviting me onto your podcast.
Fantastic. Well, I was very excited. I have your book. I usually keep your book really close. It's generally in my bookshelf and my top reads. So when I started this, you were one of the top guests that I wanted to interview and talk with because this is super exciting.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Now, Robert, how did you first get interested in diving, and what drew you to Sidemount instead?
So it was shortly after I got married. I actually, even before that, I'd always had an interest in diving. Working as a nurse, I'd come across some scuba instructors and who had actually invited me to come down to like Mexico. I was in Arizona at this time, and it just wasn't right at the time either. A couple of times it was the person I was in a relationship with wasn't interested, and so that made it a little bit more difficult. And so I ended up getting married to my wife in 2003, and she had always been interested in diving. And funny thing is, she showed me a National Geographic with a picture that Wes Skiles had taken in Dipolder 2. Mm-hmm. And, with 4 divers in this huge room. And she said, this would be really neat to do. And I looked at it and thought, that's way beyond what we would be able to do as recreational divers. It's just, I don't foresee us ever doing anything like that. I said, but I'd be interested in diving. So we signed up for a class, got certified, and fell in love with it from day one. I mean, we actually bought all of our gear before we went and did our checkout dives and got certified in our own gear. And within the first year, we had over 100 dives together, and it just kept going from there. And we actually, we looked at the different specialties that were available and everything, and we traveled to Florida, mainly with the intent of doing some of the wrecks on the coast. We got blown out of there, so we decided to do some of the recreational caverns. Like I think we did Blue Spring and Orange City and Paradise Spring, and we fell in love with that and signed up for a cavern class for our next trip. We came back like 5 months later, did our cavern class, and at that point we were also working on our dive master certifications, and it just kind of spiraled out of control from there.
That's usually how it happens. That's for sure. I think all of us got really excited, but we didn't know what we were going to do. And we just started buying gear and going in a direction. Then all of a sudden, then magically you become an instructor somehow down that road. And
yeah, exactly. And during one of our trips to Florida, while we were traveling back and forth to do our cave training, and we started seeing some people in Sidemount. Not at that time, I'm talking 2004, 2005. You didn't see very many Sidemount divers, but we did see a few here and there, and it just piqued my interest. And my first Sidemount dive was on a Franken rig that I put together in
Robert, we lost your We lost you for a second there, Robert.
Can
There
you
we
hear me
go.
now?
Perfect. I don't know what
Yeah.
happened. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So as I was saying, my first side mount dive was in Lake Pleasant, Arizona. I just put together a Franken rig from a back plate, actually a harness and wing that I had, and got a couple of aluminum tanks, and it felt really good. Now I can tell you that the rig didn't look that great. I didn't have the wing tucked down, so it was tacoing up, but just diving like that with the tanks on my sides, and it was I instantly fell in love with it and decided that I need to learn more about this. The problem was, we're talking back in 2005 or so. There was nowhere to learn side mount diving. There weren't any recreational
And what year was this
classes.
again?
Uh, this was 2005, I
Oh my
believe.
goodness. People had to been looking at you like you were crazy diving side mount in Arizona.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I had one of my students come go on a dive with me and follow me and take some pictures and everything just so I could see what I look like. Like the trim and everything was great. It was just that wing. I didn't because I didn't know any difference. I hadn't put the wing under the harness. I didn't tuck down the sides of the wing, so it was just tacoing up around nothing because there was no tank on the back, and so it didn't look great, but it felt good.
Mhm.
Because the wing was still doing what it was supposed to do up there. It just wasn't streamlined like it should have been. Um, but I like I was saying, at the time there were no recreational classes. One agency had a a technical cave side mount class, INTD. They were the only ones, but also finding an instructor that offered that class, it was even in Florida, there just weren't, it wasn't that popular at the time. And so I set out to just learn it on my own. I ended up buying my first side mount rig was a Dive Right Nomad,
Mhm.
and I just spent a few years tweaking it and learning about it by myself. And because again, there just weren't that many people out there. I ran into some side mount divers here and there where I would get tidbits of information, but for the most part, there just wasn't anyone around, and you just had to kind of learn it on your own.
I'm right there with you, and I think that's a lot of how a lot of us started back in the day. We knew it was available. We had the idea. We'd kind of heard through the grapevine or seen a picture oddly somewhere of either a Mexican rig or a Florida rig or the inner tubes back in the day, and we started trying to figure it out. I started with the SMS 100, which you and I both know is a pretty poor rig for that, without a tremendous amount of modification. But same thing, I couldn't find anybody to teach me. So I started looking at what it was and started getting videotape of what I look like, and slowly but surely started making adjustments and making adjustments, and then finally information started trickling out from great guys like you that where we could find a book, and it started making more sense and make more sense, and so it, that's kind of how it is. Just for our audience, just so people know, can you share a little bit about what side mount diving is and how it really differs from other forms of diving?
So side mount diving is basically diving with tanks on your sides instead of having them on your back. Um, and from the way I view side mount diving is it's a safer form of diving, because now you have the valves and the first stages where you can see them. When they're streamlined properly, you have them in your armpits, but you can still they're being held by bungee, so you can pull them out and look at them. So if you have something's causing it to leak, you can actually look and see where that leak's coming from. Whereas with back mounted doubles, if you have an issue with the first stage or a valve back there, you can't see it. You can try to feel, and we have the valve drills that we do, but in side mount, it's there where you can see it. So I feel it's a safer way to dive. I feel it's a more streamlined way because with back mounts, the tanks are right there. They're not when you have them under properly trimmed out at your sides, your shoulders are actually in front of a large portion of that tank. So now you've just reduced how much of yourself and your equipment is moving forward through the water versus having the tanks on the back. It's also more stable because with tanks on your back, if you twist around, that heavy weight on your back is going to pull you around and you can end up flipping upside down quite easily. Whereas with the tanks on your sides, if you twist a little bit to the side, because they're farther out, basic physics says, no, we want it to be back like this. And so it's just a more stable configuration. And it's to me it's a lot more enjoyable to dive in side mounts with the tanks, because of all the benefits that we have than it is to dive in back mount.
Absolutely. I enjoy it quite a bit. And for old guys like us as well, there's always the benefits of no pressure on your back.
Yeah. And I've got bad knees and ankles. I've had multiple surgeries on those. So it's much easier to walk one tank at a time over to the water than it is to walk with 100 pounds of steel on my back, from the van to the water.
That's one of the things I never understood is once you try side mount, why would you ever go back to twin sets ever?
Yeah. And I was still doing it for a while after I went side mount, just because at that time there were still, my students were kind of a 50-50 mix, but pretty much I'd say more than 90% of the students that I had come to me in back mount were diving side mount by the time that I was finished with them. And not because I was trying to influence them to do it, although I was, but it wasn't like, you have to learn side mount. It was, they just looked at it and thought that looks so much more comfortable, so much more streamlined, and they wanted to do it. And even the students that came to me and weren't sure, I'd say, okay, I'm going to put you in side mount for one dive and back mount for another dive, and then you tell me how you want to go on. Not a single student chose back mount. They all chose side mount and went from there. So it's definitely, I from what I've seen over my career, it's definitely something that people are more apt to do. They'd rather do that. And in fact, even with recreational diving, I haven't dove back mount single tank in years. I take one tank, strap it on my left side, and I take my side mount regs. I just take the long hose, put it on the left side, first stage, and that's how I go dive, even recreationally.
And I agree with you 100%. The only reason I ever go into back mount is when I have to teach an open water class, and I hate it every time. But I agree with you. It's so just get the naysayers out of the way. Single tank side mount. Talk to us a little bit about that. That's
so single tank side mount. Like I said, after going side mount, I dove back mount, single tank back mount a few times, and when teaching recreational classes like open water, advanced open water, I would do that. And then, but when I was going out on my own recreational trips to the Caribbean or other places, I didn't see any sense in doing that when I felt more comfortable in single tank side mount. And when you're using an aluminum 80, you don't even need to have a counterbalance weight on the other side. Some people think you do, but I never do. I have the aluminum 80 there. You're talking about from full to empty, a 4-pound shift. When you're diving steel cylinders that are cave filled to 3,600 psi, you can get a 4-pound shift just in breathing the cylinder, one cylinder to the other cylinder. So 4 pounds is not a difficult amount of balance to uh, to manage. So, I just dive with an aluminum 80 on one side. I usually only even need maybe 2 pounds of weight um, to maintain neutral buoyancy. And again, it's just more comfortable having it there. Everything's there where I can see it. And I've only come across one dive operator in all of our travels throughout the Caribbean and everything that said no, that they don't accommodate side mount divers. And that was all before the trip, so I just chose someone else that did accommodate, and we've been able to dive all over several different islands without ever having to put a tank on our backs.
That's awesome. And the funny thing about it is I usually get on the boat and I make a bet with anybody that has a problem with me being a side mount. I tell them, I'll tell you what, if you can gear up and get in the water faster than I can, I'll buy you lunch. And I stole that from Steve Martin, but a while ago. But there's getting geared up, getting ready, getting in the water, getting comfortable, everything else. There's nobody that can beat you in side mount. It's too simple.
Yeah, I mean, and that's if you're proficient in it. I tell everyone, don't go onto a boat after taking a 2 or 3 day side mount class and expect that you're going to be able to dive side mount off of a boat and not hold everyone up. Make sure that you practice it when you have time to practice it, when you don't have any time limits, the boat crew or other divers. And once you can become proficient in it, yeah, it's actually, you can be geared up and in the water faster than everyone else.
I agree completely. Now, you started side mount well before it was cool. So how have you seen it evolve over the years?
It's what I've seen with side mount. Obviously, it's become a lot more popular. I think every single agency is teaching it now. Even GUE has been looking at doing a recreational type side mount class, although the restrictions on it don't really make it, and the restrictions that they have on it don't really make it recreational, but they're trying to market it more as a recreational. But it's, almost every manufacturer now has a side mount rig. When I first started, we had two on the market. We had the Dive Right Nomad and the Armadillo. That was it. Now, pretty much every manufacturer has at least one side mount rig. Many of them have more than have 3 or 4 different side mount rigs. And so it's when I started diving, it was rare to see a side mount diver, and I'm talking about at the Florida Springs. It was rare to see a side mount diver there. I was usually the only one, or my wife and I were the only ones there in side mount. Nowadays, it's rare to see a back mount diver. Almost everyone's in side mount. So it's really come a long way that people are seeing that it's not just a cool thing, or it's not just for diving in small restrictions, but it's a way of diving, and it's a way of diving that everyone can enjoy.
So what inspired you to write the first book, Sidemount Diving, an almost complete comprehensive guide?
So I saw that there was something missing from Sidemount at the time. I mentioned INTD had their course back in 2005. They had, and they still use the same book today, I believe, the same side mount, no mount book, but it's more geared toward cave diving and advanced type of side mount stuff. And it's a short book. There's not a whole lot to it. Jill Heinerth also had her side mount book, Side Mount Profiles. A great book. I read through it as research for what I was doing. And the one thing I found lacking in that, her book is geared toward a different audience. She's trying to introduce people to the world of side mount, but not so much give them a how-to guide on side mount. So her book, Side Mount Profiles, this is side mount. This is what we do. This is how we do, how we look. She's got her great photographs in it, but there's no instructional material in there saying, if you want to dive side mounts, this is how you need to adjust your bungees. This is how you can make modifications to your rig. This is what you can do to set up your tanks. None of that's included in there, and that's what I saw as a big um, factor that was missing in side mount diving. So I started putting the book together. It actually took me, I started putting it together, I think back in 2011. It took me about 4 years to gather what I had. The big thing was getting the photographs for the book, because I wanted it to have a lot of photographs where people can look at it and see how things were done, how things looked. Um, so I put that out in 2015, and um, I mean, at that point, Sidemount was still evolving a lot, and pretty much within a year, I saw that it was going to need an update, and I started working on the second edition. I finally released that in 2020, and it's more than double the length of pages, probably more than 3 times the amount of photographs in it. I really sat down with that and tried to make it a thorough. If you want a side mount dive and you don't have access to a quality instructor, at least you're going to have this. It's still only a tool. It still is very beneficial to have someone that can mentor you or teach you, but it's is not everyone has that. Not everyone has that quality instructor that they can go to. So that was the the focus, and that was to provide something like that, and to provide something for instructors to be able to say, hey, I recommend you read this book before you take my class, because it's going to make you be several steps ahead of the game when you come into the class.
I agree with that completely. And as we spoke earlier, that I teach Sidemount and center range Sidemount and technical diving, and this is one of the first things I recommend to my students. While the information from my agencies that I work with, they have information out there, but it's not complete. It's not nearly as thorough as it could be, and they leave the honors to the instructor themselves because of the amount of different side mount rigs out there, types of side mount diving, everything else, every excuse you can come up with. And so I usually say, hey, pick up your copy, read through that, and then let's discuss. Let's work on your mentorship and get you there. But you need to have a more firm grasp of knowledge of the physics of it before we really start getting you wet. So I've appreciated having your book as one of the tools for my teaching. So, kind of along that lines, a lot changed from 2015 to 2020. What do you think's changed in the world of side mount diving since you wrote the second book, and how has it influenced your where you're going next with possibly a third edition?
So the only by the time I released the book in 2020, Sidemount had evolved quite a bit. Like at that point already, a lot of the different manufacturers had side mount rigs available on the market. And I've tried to include as many photographs as I can, but my book's not about this is the rig that you should buy. It's about this is these are the features of the different rigs out there. Now you need to go and do the research and figure out which rig will work better for your diving. Um, so I try to keep it a little vague in that sense, because I don't want to tell people, look, I dive the armadillo, so I think everyone should dive the armadillo. That's not the case. In fact, very few people dive the armadillo, and that's just because they don't have the manufacturing capability that it's manufacturers like Hollis and Dive Right now. But it's worked out to be the best rig for me. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best rig for you. And it's also not the best rig for me to use for every type of diving, because I dive something completely different when I'm diving the caves in Mexico. But getting back to your question about the evolution of it, by 2020, open circuit side mount diving, I think had evolved pretty much to the extent it could. We had figured out, and by that point, we had figured out what the best way to carry stage tanks were is. There are several different ways that you can carry stage tanks. We figured out some, we just figured out a lot of different things about Sidemount diving that we didn't really know in 2015 because it hadn't evolved to that point. From 2020 on, what we're seeing more of is the evolution of side mount rebreather diving. A lot of manufacturers are now trying to put out side mount rebreathers, and that's where I think side mount, where we're going to see more growth in side mount is with rebreathers more than with open circuit.
Fair enough. It's definitely a growing field. We've got several exciting new units that are scheduled on the market in the next 3 to 12 months that should revolutionize and change how we work in the CCR industry as well. So I'm excited. That's for sure. Now, this has got to be a lot. I mean, I know for myself, balancing teach me to dive with other portions of my life, plus teaching and instructing. Now, how do you balance your experience as a diver and your experience as an instructor in writing these books?
So basically, I've got my office time where I come into the office and I work on the books. If I'm not out diving, I'll usually spend 2 3 hours at the computer just working on the projects that I have, the written projects. The most recent one I've been working on is another translation of Sidemount diving. Just had someone translate it into Dutch, and so that's been where I've been focusing my efforts as far as that recently is more on getting it, making side mount diving book accessible to as many people as possible, and working on just getting the translations out there so that more people are able to enjoy the benefits of reading about it. And but I still make sure that I have time reserved to get out there and dive, because that's what this is all
Of
about,
course.
is getting out there and having fun and diving. And it's sometimes I'll I'll look up at the clock and the day's just gone by, and I can't believe that it's, sometimes it's really hard to balance everything because there's just so much. But I do that to myself. I put it all on my plate myself, but I just keep going at it and trying to get as much done as I can.
Absolutely. It can be a lot. It can be overwhelming to make sure you're balancing life with work-life balance, especially in diving, because I think we as divers, especially when you start entering the technical realm, tend to be more hyper focused. And it's hard to break out of that hyper focus. We get into the cave, we start diving the cave, we build the plan for that. We're going out on this 4 hour dive, and there's a lot of work that most people don't realize when you are going to do a big dive like that. You just don't grab a bunch of tanks, drive over to the site, jump in the water, and start diving. It doesn't work that way. There's almost as many hours in preparation as there is in any good dive. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So definitely interesting to get that. Now, kind of to back up into for more of our entry level people, can you share some tips for beginners who are interested in trying side mount diving for the first time?
So my recommendation is find someone who is experienced in it to help you. It's not an easy thing to go at it on your own because there's just so much to it. Um, one of the things I mentioned in the book is when you're transitioning from backmount diving to side mount diving, with a tank on your back, whether it's manifolded doubles or a single tank, you've got that valve right there that prevents you from being able to lift your head all the way back. And so you have to adjust your body a little bit so that you can see forward. Well, you don't have that issue in side mount. In side mount, you can actually bend your head back even more, and you can stay relatively horizontal and streamlined without having to worry about something hitting you on the back of the head. And so this makes it, now you're in the water, and when you're used to diving like this because of that valve back there, now you can dive like this and still see forward. That's a different sensation on your body. In fact, I had a student years ago who I kept telling him, you are perfectly horizontal, you're perfectly trimmed out, you're fine. And he said, but I don't feel right. I feel like I'm too head low. So I had taken a bunch of photographs of him with an underwater camera because I use a camera for all of my Sidemount classes. And I showed him right there. I said, look, this is how you look in the water. I said, the reason you feel different is because in Backmount, you had to be more head up to be able to see forward. You don't have to have that now. You can now raise your head up more and keep your body down. That's, you feel like your head down, and it is down compared to what it was before. But it's actually perfectly horizontal. And I mean, he had gotten angry at me because I kept telling him, no, you're not head down. And when he saw that, he finally got it. But it took seeing that to realize that. And so, if you're trying out Sidemount and you just get in the water and you don't have anyone to take video or pictures of you or to help you along, you may not know that what it may feel fine to you, but it may look horrible to someone else. And so you really do need to have someone that can mentor you at least into that journey in Sidemount, because it's not it's not the easiest thing to get into if you just try getting into it on your own, unguided.
There's definitely some different physics involved with diving side mount than there is in back mount. That is for sure, as well as some setup issues and placement issues that are absolutely crucial. The nice thing is the basics are the basics of the basics, and if you can get the basics, the rest is easy.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the common mistakes you see in new side mount divers?
The big one is tank position. Most new side mount divers have the tank sitting too low. They're almost front mounting them. And part of the reason for that, I believe, is because in order to get them properly streamlined where they need to be at your sides, the bungees need to be kind of tight. Well, with the bungees being tight, that makes it more difficult to put them over the valves to get them in proper position. And so they tend to, well, we'll just make the bungees are too hard to pull over, so I'm going to make them a little longer, and that'll make it easier. But now the tank valves are hanging 6, 8, 12 inches below them, and they're no longer in a nice streamlined side mount position. So that's the big mistake that I see with most side mount divers. The second biggest mistake I see is putting the tank band too low on the tank. They feel foot heavy because we're changing the position of the tanks from up here down here. And with that shifting, that does bring more weight onto the feet, toward your feet. And so you tend to be a little bit more foot heavy. And they think, well, if I just move the tank band down to the bottom of the tank, that will fix that problem. But it really doesn't. All it does is forces the tank to be more forward. And now the tank again ends up with the valve in front of the shoulders instead of in the armpits, and so it's really all about positioning those tanks. That's the biggest mistakes that I see with new side mount divers, and some experienced side mount divers as well.
Oh, sure. That's just because you've been doing it for a while or doing it for a period of time does not make you an expert make, right? It's doing it right over and over again, not doing it just doing it, but doing it correctly. So, how do you prepare for technical dives?
So you go back to the old Patty saying, plan your dive your
Mhm.
plan. That's when I'm doing a technical dive. I plan my dive. I sit down, Most of my technical gold dives are in caves. Most of my diving is in caves. And I look at the profile of the cave. I look at the distance and I calculate, how much time am I going to be spending at the different depths so that I know, all right, this is where I'm going to have to turn my dive in order to get back with plenty of air and enough reserves. And this is how much decompression I'm going to have. So I sit down and plan all that. And yeah, I use dive computers. I've got Shearwater dive computers that I use, and they are there as a backup. They're there to confirm, to verify that yes, I'm sticking to my plan. I can look down at them and say, yeah, this is how much deco is telling me I'm going to have at this point, and that lines up with what my plan was. So everything's good. It's more of a mental check balance to say, yeah, you haven't messed up yet. You're doing okay.
That's definitely the trick. You hadn't messed up yet, and so on that, every diver, especially at our level, has had an oh crap moment. Tell us about one of yours.
Um, yeah, because of the way I approach cave diving, I'm pretty good at reducing the oh crap moments. I've had a few. I've gotten stuck. Actually, probably the biggest oh crap moment was I was checking out a fissure crack down in Mexico. It was in a reef, but where there's known caves. Actually, not too far from the entrance to a cave I'd been exploring down there. And I went into this fissure crack and got in probably about 25 feet or so before I got stuck in the passage, A-framed, and couldn't move. I'm in 15 feet of water, about 20 feet inside, 25 feet inside a fissure crack, and I'm thinking, all the exploration I've done, I've been more than 10,000 feet back from an entrance in a cave, and I'm going to die right here, 15 feet deep, 25 feet in from open water. But I stopped and I said, look, I got plenty of air. I went in this with full tanks. I've got plenty of gas. I've got plenty of time to figure this out. And it took me a little bit, but I did obviously manage to get unstuck and out of there. The oh crap moments that I've had, I've gotten stuck a few times because I look at my only criteria for going through a restriction is I have to be able to go through with full lungs, because I don't want to have to exhale to make my chest cavity smaller and then get stuck and not be able to take the breath in. So if I can't get through it with full lungs, then I'm not going to try to get it. And so I've tried to go through some pretty small restrictions and ended up getting stuck. Always get out, but sometimes it's like, oh crap, what have I gotten myself into now?
Fair enough. That's probably a good rule of thumb, is to make sure you can go through it with full lungs, not empty lungs, because we need to dive a little bit of reserve, even if it's just a lung full. So, well, can you what other memorable experiences have you had while diving? Can you give us another example of something fun that you've done? Maybe a positive one?
Yeah, again, with cave diving, it's just I've done a lot of exploration here in Florida and down in Cozumel. Here in Florida, I've probably explored Lines Virgin Passage, more than 2 miles worth of Virgin Passage. And in Cozumel, we're at this point, the big project down there has been with Cueva Quebrada, which is Chankanaab is the main entrance for that cave. And it went from the original explorers in Backmount. They did this all back in the 80s, early 90s, and the map that they produced had 29,000 feet of passage in it. We're currently at about 85,000 feet of passage.
Oh wow!
And one of the sections alone section Escondido was a section that I found it was a side mount pass. It was a side mount restriction to get through, but once it was a short side mount restriction, once you got through, you were in big passage again. And that section alone has more passage in it than the original explorers had back in the 80s and 90s. And that's really probably the best thing that's happened because of side mount. Was finding, getting through this restriction and finding this whole other world down there that's gone unexplored for all this time.
That's amazing. Now, just to clarify for the rest of us out here, short restriction. How long is a short restriction in your world?
I'm looking at like if you've got just like a foot thick wall that's got that you've got to be in side mount to get through. That's short. A long restriction for me would be something that where I'm in side mount passage, where it's my chest is touching the floor, my back is touching the ceiling, and I'm doing this for 30, 40 feet.
Okay.
That tends to be a long restriction because you got to come back out.
Oh, absolutely. And for the rest of us out here, I can tell you from personal experience that in a cave, underwater, in a tight restriction, a long restriction of 30 feet feels like a mile. It feels a lot longer than it actually is. And then you get through it and you measure it and you look at your line and you're like, well, that was 30 feet, but gosh, it doesn't feel like 30 feet.
Exactly.
That is for sure. And even worse is when you're stuck, every second's equal to about 5 minutes to 10 minutes. That's for sure. I always thought it was amazing how fast my mind could go through scenarios in that situation where I was stuck into something where I couldn't quite move it. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. You look at the amount of time you're actually stuck, it's 2 minutes.
But it seems like it's been 2 hours.
Absolutely. It's impressive. In 2 minutes, I can come up with about 75 scenarios of what's going to happen, where my property is going to go. Did I leave the stove on? It's amazing the amount of things that go through your mind in just 2 minutes. I've never ceased to be amazed by how slow time goes in that. So in cave diving, it's intensified by about tenfold, in my opinion, at least. That's my humble opinion on it for sure. So
yeah.
Well, perfect. So what role do you see technology playing in the future in Sidemount diving?
Really, it goes back to the rebreathers again. It's the evolution that we're seeing with rebreathers. I think that's where the technology is going to be as far as open circuit. I don't know that there's much. It's open circuit. Side mount is real basic. There's not a whole lot to it. There's not a whole lot that technology can help with it. Some people are using the transmitters and all that connected to their dive computers. I'm still kind of old school and I like my analog gauges to look at, but it's going to be with the rebreathers and how they advance and how they move side mount on into to the next level.
Now, what role do you hope to play in the evolution of Sidemount diving?
At this point, I'm kind of dialing it back a little bit. I'm still mentoring people. There's still a lot of people out there who are wanting to learn side mounts. So I'm looking at that. As far as the rebreathers, I do dive rebreathers. I have a couple of side mount rebreathers that I also use. But for the kind of diving that I do, open circuit just makes more sense to me. Partly because with rebreathers, you still have to have enough bailout to get out from your deepest penetration into a cave should something happen. And the worst case scenario is taking a CO2 hit where your breathing rate just can quadruple or more. And now you're having to go onto open circuit because you've had something happen to the rebreather where you're getting the CO2 breaking through the scrubber. Um, but now you still have to get back out from 3,000 feet, 4,000 feet in the cave with the bailout that you have. And and so really rebreathers for me are more of a deep diving thing or limited penetration, not so much that deep penetration, but it does have its place, especially with teams of divers where they have support divers that can bring in a bunch of bailout and have it staged throughout different parts of the cave. And so these expedition teams that they're the ones that are going to keep advancing this because they're the ones that are doing those dives. I'm not really doing the dives like that at this point. I'm sticking more to, I still have active projects in Cozumel that I'm doing regularly, and still have some stuff here in Florida that I'm doing as well. But I'm not doing stuff like exploring Wakala or some of the deeper caves over there where rebreathers are more beneficial to what they're doing. So they're going to be the ones that work on that. I'm going to keep tabs on it and see what's happening. And maybe in the third edition, we'll have a bigger section on rebreathers in the book.
That would be my next question. Can you tell us about any ongoing projects you're working on related to diving?
Well, besides the exploration projects that I mentioned already, working on translations of the book. Currently, the first translation we did was in German, which Dirk Lehman over in Germany volunteered to do that. He worked on that for about a year. Then he shoots it back to me, and I spend the next couple of months reformatting it, making sure all the images in there line up with the text and that everything formats nicely. Most recent translation was into Spanish, which I actually worked on that. I put that together and then had a native speaker in Mexico review my work and touch up some things here and there that I had missed. And then currently, I just got the Dutch translation, and I've been working on formatting the files for that, and that should be coming out probably by the end of May. We just have a few more things that we need to work on that, and that'll be coming out. I've had someone volunteer to help with a Chinese translation. And so we're going to see how that works. We're going to try AI for doing that translation, and then just having him go through and make sure that AI did a good job on it. And also going to be looking at a French translation. So a lot of translations on this. We're up to, with Dutch, that'll be third translation, so 4 languages that it'll be available in. And besides that, I've also been working on a fiction novel that I'm in the final steps of putting that together. And it's about cave diving, of course. You got to write what you know
Absolutely.
about. So I'm in the final steps of putting that together and hoping to have that out sometime this summer.
Fantastic. That'll be neat. And now, if I remember right, that's a continuation of a previous book, isn't it?
Well, no, the fiction novel, this is the first in the series.
Okay.
It's actually a series of 3 that I'm going to have using the same characters. This one, I don't know if you remember back in 2011, we had a diver disappear, last seen over a vortex spring here in the Florida Panhandle. His name was Ben McDaniel. It was in the news. There was a lot of. I was part of one of the first search teams to go into the system and look for his body. The body was never found. So the basis of this book is what basically what happens if, or what if this was what happened? What if the body was found there and it was removed from the cave
Gotcha.
because the management didn't want the negative publicity on having a cave fatality
Oh,
there.
gotcha.
And so it's about, I think we're just under 300 pages, um, about 85,000 words on it, and it just takes you through this little journey of what if this is the explanation for why a body was never found in vortex.
Gotcha.
uh, and then I've already started on a second in the series, which takes the main character from that book, and where, because when he finds a body, he's just an open water diver. Then he continues on, gets his cave training, and we go on adventures with him throughout his as he's growing as a cave
Okay.
diver.
Well, that's exciting. Keep us posted on that. I'd love to buy that book as well.
Definitely.
So, and support you in that. That's for sure. Now, just to clarify, Ben McDaniel was never found, though, was he?
No, to this day, no one has ever found it. Honestly, there have been so many search teams in there looking for him. Nothing has ever turned up. I don't think, personally, I don't think that he died in that cave. So the story that I tell is just one story. It was a rumor that was going around back then, and I just kind of went with it and turned it into a novel.
Sure.
There were rumors back then that some people thought that he was in financial trouble, and so he staged this, left his truck parked there, and then disappeared. And he's off living lives in Mexico or somewhere in the Caribbean.
Certainly very plausible. That's for sure. So, Robert, what advice would you give somebody that's considering moving into a diving career?
So, for anyone going into a diving career, make sure you have a backup plan. I mean, I've been fortunate. When I went into it, when I started teaching, I was already working as a nurse, and that made it easy because I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week. And so I had time on my 4-day weekends to get out there and teach diving and do projects like that. When I came out to Florida, I actually cut back to per diem status with nursing. So, if my schedule was light on the teaching, I could pick up more shifts at the hospital. If I had a busy schedule teaching, I could tell the hospital I'm not available this week. And so I had that ability to be able to still, I never depended on a diving career to pay the bills. But I was fortunate that, I was able to make it a successful career and turn it into not just the teaching, but now the book publications. And so if you want to go into a diving career, make sure you have an alternative. Don't count on that, especially when you're first starting out. Most places, most dive shops don't pay their dive masters. It's, you come and teach first, get the experience. Or you come and dive master first, get the experience. We'll let you dive for free when we go out diving, things like that. But trying to earn a living in the dive industry, you have to put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of sweat into it to be successful. And I'm sure you know that.
I do. I absolutely do. And I get it completely. So, to kind of return back to subject for you, and your specialty, what do you feel the first step in learning Sidemount should be for any student?
Again, going back, first step in learning Sidemount is find someone who's qualified, that can guide you into this journey into Sidemount. Someone who is proficient at it, and can at least give you some pointers, get in the water with you. Having someone there to watch over you and give you feedback is really important, because the way you feel in the water doesn't necessarily equate to the way in the water. So you need that extra set of eyes, or at least someone that can hold a camera, a GoPro up, and get video of you, so that you can review it later and say, "Yeah, I can see where I'm not doing so well there, and I need to fix that."
Fair enough. I remember when I first got out of the Marine Corps, I bought a whole bunch of ski stuff and went down the slopes and yeah, I hit a pretty rough patch and crashed. And this little girl came with a ski school right behind me. She was probably 9 or 10, and she stopped and she looked at me. She says, "You look good, but you don't look good doing it." And that's very much how it is with diving. So I think that's great advice. Make sure you find somebody and find a qualified instructor that knows what they're teaching and what they're doing. And then make sure you
Yeah,
videotape yourself often. And I throw out there that I'm a high level technical instructor. I dive a lot. My wife and I dive together, and we dive all kinds of situations. I still videotape myself on a regular basis to make sure that I'm in trim, where I'm at, what I look like. Is there something I'm missing? And I still go through practice of
yeah,
skills once in a while, as and just on video to watch myself. Can I stay within that 6 inches of rise? Am I floating forward, backwards, sideways? Am I tipping one direction? Can I do all my skills regularly? So I practice it about every 6 months. I videotape myself. I think that's a great thing to do. So, what message would you want to share with people who might be hesitant to try side mount diving?
there's nothing to be afraid of. Just get out there and try it. It's, if you get set up with someone who knows what they're doing, you'll get in and you'll have a really great experience right off the bat, and um, you'll never look back again. It'll be something that you fall in love with.
Awesome. And I agree completely. So here's our deep dive question: Is give me one secret that you learned in producing this book that you think you didn't know before that you picked up and you're like, it was an aha moment for you.
One secret that I learned in producing this book. Well, I could tell you that putting a book together is not an easy
Oh no,
task.
not at all.
But you're probably looking for something more along the lines of side mount. Well, one thing that really came to me as I was doing this, and it's something that I always incorporated, but I guess it was more of it became a realization as I was putting this book together, is that even to this day, as much diving as I've done, as long as I've been side mount diving, and as many students as I've certified and people that I've mentored, I'm still learning all the time from them. I don't think I know it all. I go out there, I see other people diving side mount. I will look at what they're doing. I'll look to see if there's anything that I can steal from
Mhm.
them and use for myself and put in the next edition. Because it's still an evolving type of diving, and there's always something more to learn from it. Most of the stuff that a lot of the stuff that I have in this book um, is stuff that I learned from my students. The cold water tips that I have in there were things that I learned from teaching students that came down here from Canada, students that came over from Europe. In Florida, we don't do cold water diving. 69-degree water is not really cold. I'm talking, water where you have to have dry gloves on with, and so, or really thick neoprene gloves, and that makes it harder to deal with the bungees, to deal with the exhaust valves, to deal with the bolt snaps. And so there are things in there that that I took from my students that I had that came from cold water environments, and we had these issues, we discussed them, we came up with solutions, and I attribute it to them. It's I learned from them. And yes, I've been diving in cold water environments. I've traveled to Europe several times. I've even dove in the caves of Norway, but all because I was able to do that successfully because of the students that I had prior to that came from those cold water regions and helped me evolve as a side mount diver myself.
That's awesome. So, question for you. So, we teach the K2. What are your thoughts on the K2?
Um, Well, one of the things that I'm a big believer that whatever works for
Mhm.
you, go with it. Personally, I prefer to have the horseshoe shaped wings versus the um the donut shaped
Mhm.
wings. Um, with the K2, if I'm not mistaken, that's kind of like the stealth
It
XV.
is.
Um, I can't remember off the top of my head where the butt plate is positioned on that. I know with the katana, the previous version, the katana, and in other Hollis versions, they had the butt plate sitting on top of the wing. And one of my issues with that's always been that, when you start off the dive and you've got more air in the tanks, and so the tanks are heavier, you need more air in the wing. That's going to push the butt plate up off of your back, and if your tanks are hooked up to the butt plate, that's going to pull them up as well. And as you progress through your dive and breathe them down and don't need as much air in the wing to compensate for that, now they're shifting. So for me, that's more of an issue because I like to have my tanks a lot more streamlined because of the type of diving that I'm doing. But the shift that the tanks do on systems like that is not that big of a shift. And for some people, it's fine if you're not doing tight restrictions. Having the bottoms of the tank shift a little bit, or if you're doing open water, that's not going to be as big of a deal. It's not as big of a concern. So it's the the K2 works for a lot of people. A lot of people swear by it. Personally, it just doesn't really fit in with the type of diving that I
Sure.
do. I've been using the armadillo. That was I got that a year after. I happened to just someone sold me a used one about a year after, and I bought it because I wanted to try it, and I fell in love with it. So, other than the first year of diving the Nomad and using the Nomad here and there after that, I most of my time has been in Armadillo and Florida caves, and it works perfect for me. So, why change something that works
If it ain't
great?
broke, fix it.
I've the XT, I've looked at the K2, um, and I've had an interest in it, but again, the Armadillo works fine for me
Sure.
here. In Cozumel, I use kind of a version of the Razor. Actually, at this point, it's so modified it really isn't even a Razor anymore. But it's an H harness, and I use the Sump UK wing that Andy used to make. I think I was one of the last ones to get it before the factory where he was having them manufactured burned down or something. Now he's making new wings again, but you know, I used the wing that he was making years ago, and it works for me for my diving down there. And then I use something completely different when I do my recreational single tank dives. Um, so I've got three different rigs that I use on a pretty regular basis, and yeah, I'm kind of setting my ways on. I've tweaked them enough that I
Sure.
don't. My tweaking days are behind me, kind of. And I still tweak a little bit, but I kind of like the way things are set up and things work for me at this point.
I agree with that completely. So here's kind of a vanity point for you. How cool was it? What was your feeling the first time you saw your book in print?
It was a really good feeling to when it first came out and the first edition. I did a pre-order thing and had almost 200 copies pre-ordered before it ever went to print. So, and for at that point, in 2015, it still is kind of a niche market, but back then it really was. So I thought 200 copies pre-ordered was just fantastic. And already with the second edition, it's only been out for three years, and we're already at this point uh, pretty close to surpassing the number of copies that were sold with the first edition in 5 years of being in print.
Wow. Awesome.
So, we've sold thousands of copies all over the world. Um, Europe, Australia, South America, just that's what when I log into Amazon to look at my dashboard and see where these books are being sold. It's just that's really what gets me, is to see that it's known worldwide. It's not just a U.S. thing or a Florida thing, but it's worldwide.
That's amazing, and it's got to be a terrific feeling. Congratulations. That is an amazing accomplishment. Well, thank you for coming on today. I do appreciate, Robert. You've been a wonderful guest, and I've learned quite a bit. I enjoyed speaking with you, and I look forward to diving with you soon. Absolutely.
Yeah, Benjamin, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. Robert Neto, author of Sidemount Diving. By the way, special offer for you if you get your copy from his website, sidemountbook.com. Use code TEACHMETODIVE, $15 off. And as you know, as a diver, every $15 counts towards more dive gear. So use that Teach Me to Dive code and get yourself a copy of the book. It's absolutely worth it. I can tell you, I recommend it to my students in Sidemount Diving. I keep a copy here personally. I will not give away my copy because I don't like having to order another copy myself. So get your own. This is mine. But please take your time, support side mounting. It's definitely an increasing sport. It's becoming more and more mainstream. I'm seeing it on boats once in a while now. And it's not just for cavers anymore. So again, Robert, thank you for your time. I super appreciate it. We're going to get as many of these books sold for you as we possibly can. And we're going to come out to Florida and make sure we get some diving together.
That'd be great, Benjamin. Thanks.
Thank you.